Ranger lunged at the Cardassian guard's throat, his genetically engineered neo-mastiff jaws crushing the alien's larynx in a spray of crimson blood, as the alien bureaucrat cringed in horror, seeing the Earth dog killing his comrade. Greg Powell had warned the Cardassians, but the grey reptilian aliens just wouldn't listen. The rugged ex-marine turned space trucker knew better than to fuck with human pets, but the Cardassian slimeball Groose kept demanding a higher cut of the profits for the shipment of exotic Earth animals Greg was delivering. Greg had arrived at the seedy spaceport on the outskirts of the Cardassian Empire, expecting the usual smooth delivery, but as he walked through the decrepit station, he saw sickening sights of animal abuse and neglect that made his blood boil. Cages packed with whimpering creatures stacked high, foul puddles of urine and excrement pooling on the floor. "What the hell is this?" Greg snapped at Gruss as they walked through the docking bay. "You treat animals like this?" The Cardassian bureaucrat snorted dismissively. His oily scales glistened under the flickering lights. "You humans and your sentiment for lower life forms. To the Cardassian Empire, all lesser species are mere commodities to be used as we see fit." Greg clenched his fists, his knuckles cracking. Ranger growled at his side, sensing his master's anger, but Greg resisted the urge to break the alien's jaw. He needed to complete this delivery. "Just give me my payment and I'll be on my way," Greg said through gritted teeth. Gruss's lips curled into a greedy smirk. But I'm afraid the terms of our arrangement have changed. I'll be requiring an additional 20% cut, unless you prefer I confiscate your precious creatures entirely." Greg's patience snapped. He stepped forward until he towered over the spindly Cardassian. "Listen here, you piece of shit. A deal's a deal. I'm not giving you 1 red cent more, and you're sure as hell not laying a finger on my animals." Gruss reached for his communicator, intending to call station security. But before he could touch the button, a massive explosion rocked the entire spaceport. Alarms blared, and emergency lights flashed red. Distant screams and weapons fire echoed through the corridors. A rebel faction opposed to the Cardassian government had launched a surprise attack on the station, and in the ensuing chaos, stray blaster fire struck the cages holding the Earth animals, blowing them wide open. Suddenly, dozens of terrified and confused creatures were running loose through the war-torn spaceport. Greg grabbed his own weapon, a trusty Winchester plasma rifle, and ordered Ranger to heal. If any of these innocent animals died on this alien hellhole, there would be hell to pay. Greg swore to protect them at all costs and make the Cardassians regret ever fucking with human pets, even if he had to fight through an entire rebellion to do it. Explosions rocked the station as Greg fought his way through the shattered halls, ducking low as blaster shots sizzled past his head. Ranger loped at his side, his dark coat splattered with Cardassian blood, his fangs bared. The eerie red emergency lights pulsed like a heartbeat as alarms blared. As they rounded a corner, Greg heard panicked shrieks and frenzied snarls echoing from down a side corridor. Signaling Ranger to follow, he sprinted towards the source of the cries. He skidded to a halt at the sight before him. A pack of massive neo-wolves, their fur bristling and eyes wild with fear, were trapped behind a crackling force field. 2 genetically enhanced gorillas pounded their fists against their electrified cage, bellowing in rage, and a swarm of micro-drones buzzed furiously within a sealed containment unit, their mini-lasers firing uselessly at the reinforced glass. Greg's heart clenched. He recognized these creatures from the dossiers he'd been given back on Earth. Top-secret military projects, illegal genetic experiments. These animals were more than just pets. They were weapons. And now they were the key to his survival. Greg leveled his rifle and blasted the control panels beside each cage. The force fields sputtered and died, the glass shattered into glittering shards. The creatures hesitated for a moment, eyeing Greg warily. Then, as if sensing a kindred spirit, they slowly emerged. Ranger sniffed at the neo-wolves, who sniffed back, a silent communication passing between them. The gorillas lumbered over to Greg, studying him with surprisingly intelligent eyes. The micro-drones hovered above his shoulder, scanners whirring. "Stick with me," Greg said, meeting each of their gazes. "We'll get out of this together." Just then, heavy footsteps echoed from the far end of the hall. Greg spun to see Gruss marching towards them, flanked by a phalanx of heavily armed Cardassian guards. The slippery bastard must have rallied his men to hunt down the escaped creatures, and to capture Greg for his defiance. "Surrender, human," Gruss spat, his eyes glinting with malice. "Those animals belong to the Cardassian Empire now." Greg just smiled grimly and chambered a plasma round in his rifle. "Over my dead body, you piece of shit." With a roar of outrage, the Cardassians opened fire. But Greg was already moving, diving behind a shattered pillar as blaster shots scorched the deck. Ranger leapt into the fray, tearing out throats with ruthless efficiency. The Neo-wolves scattered and flanked the enemy, moving with pack-honed precision. The guerrillas charged forward, their armor-plated fists pulverizing Cardassian skulls into paste. And the micro-drones swarmed over the guards' weapons, shorting out circuits and causing plasma rifles to explode in their users' hands. As Greg fought, dodging and returning fire, he caught glimpses of the station's dark secrets through shattered doorways and flickering holoscreens. Rows of cages filled with whimpering, tortured creatures, dissection tables smeared with blood and viscera, computers logged with cold clinical entries detailing barbaric experiments. This wasn't just a trafficking hub. It was a house of horrors. Ranger suddenly stiffened, his hackles rising as he bared his fangs at a seemingly blank wall. Greg frowned, then nodded in understanding. "Secret door, huh, boy? Good job." He slammed his fist against a hidden control panel, revealing a concealed corridor leading deeper into the station. With his newfound allies at his back, Greg plunged into the shadows, following Ranger's lead. They were close now. The hangar was just ahead. Just a little further and they'd be free of this nightmare. But even as the thought crossed Greg's mind, a cold dread settled in his gut. It had all been too easy. As if on cue, a hail of blaster fire erupted from the darkness ahead. White-hot plasma seared the air, barely missing Greg's face. He cursed and rolled behind a cargo crate, Ranger diving in beside him. Gruss's laughter echoed through the hangar, cruel and mocking. "Did you really think you could escape so easily, human? You and your pathetic pets are nothing compared to the might of the Cardassian Empire." Greg peeked around the crate and swore. Gruss stood at the far end of the hangar, smirking victoriously, and arrayed before him was a small army of Cardassian soldiers, their weapons trained on Greg's position. They were cornered, outnumbered and outgunned, but as Greg looked to Ranger and the other Earth animals crouched beside him, he saw no fear in their eyes, only determination and trust. Trust in him. Greg checked the charge on his rifle and gave a grim smile. "All right, you scaly bastards, you want a fight." He rose to his feet, Ranger at his side, a pack of genetically engineered monsters at his back. "Let's dance." Plasma sizzled past Greg's ear, the heat singeing his skin. He dove for cover behind a mangled cargo loader, Ranger skidding in beside him. The Cardassian soldiers advanced, blasters firing relentlessly. But before Greg could return fire, a new sound filled the hangar. The droning whir of hovercraft engines. He risked a glance over the loader and swore viciously. A swarm of spherical combat drones poured into the hangar, their polished chrome bodies glinting coldly in the emergency lights. The drones immediately opened fire, disruptor beams slicing through the air. They targeted Cardassian and Terran alike, programmed to eliminate any life form they detected. Greg watched in horror as a drone vaporized a gorilla, leaving only a smoldering scorch mark on the deck. "Goddamn rebels must have hacked the station security," he snarled. "They're trying to wipe us all out." Ranger whined, his ears flattening against his skull. Greg's mind raced, desperately searching for a solution. Then his gaze fell on the micro-drones hovering above his shoulder, and a plan crystallized. "All right, listen up," he barked. The animals turned to him, their eyes bright with fear and trust. "We need to take out those combat drones. I'm going to send the micros to infiltrate the rebel command center and shut them down remotely. But they'll need a distraction." He turned to the Neo-wolves and gorillas. "That's where you come in. I need you to draw their fire, keep them occupied. Think you can handle that?" The beasts chuffed and growled their assent, muscles rippling beneath matted fur and blood-spattered hides. Greg nodded grimly. Ranger and I will head for the central power core. If we can overload it, the EMP should fry those metal bastards. We'll need cover, though. On cue, a pair of genetically modified hawks swooped down from the rafters, their razor-sharp beaks glinting. Greg grinned savagely. Perfect aerial support. He turned to Ranger. Ready to raise some hell, boy? The cybermastiff bared his fangs in reply. Move out, Greg roared. The animals sprang into action. The neo-wolves and gorillas charged from cover, bellowing war cries. The combat drones swiveled to face them, disruptors humming. Scarlet beams crisscrossed the hangar, chewing through metal and flesh. But the animals were too fast, too agile. They wove between the blasts, drawing the drones' fire. Meanwhile, the micro-drones zipped away, vanishing into ventilation ducts and maintenance hatches. Within moments, confused shouts began to echo over the station comms as the tiny mechs invaded the rebels' inner sanctum. Greg and Ranger bolted for the far side of the hangar, the Hawks flying escort above. They ducked and rolled beneath sizzling plasma, paws and combat boots pounding the blood-slick deck. The power core was close now. Greg could feel the subsonic thrum of the reactor vibrating in his bones. Suddenly a piercing shriek split the air. Greg skidded to a halt, Ranger nearly colliding with his legs. The scream had come from a side passage, barely audible over the cacophony of battle. He hesitated, torn between his mission and the desperate cry, but then Ranger whuffed urgently and trotted towards the passage, his meaning clear. Leave no one behind. Greg followed, rifle at the ready. They slipped down the shadowed corridor, senses straining. The passage opened into a dimly lit chamber, and the scent of blood and chemicals assaulted Greg's nostrils. He gagged, eyes watering. Cages lined the walls, packed with huddled, shivering forms. Not animals this time, but aliens. Dozens of species Greg had never seen before, their bioluminescent skin glowing sickly in the gloom. Some were missing limbs, others had wires and tubes snaking from sutured wounds. All stared at him with wide, terrified eyes. Rage boiled in Greg's veins, white-hot and seething. "Motherfuckers," he hissed. "Experimenting on sapients now?" He holstered his rifle and pulled a plasma torch from his belt. The aliens cringed back as he approached the cages, some whimpering plaintively. But as the torch flared to life and began slicing through the locks, their fear turned to tentative hope. "It's all right," Greg murmured as the cage doors swung open. "I'm here to help. We're getting you out of here." Slowly, hesitantly, the aliens emerged. Some leaned on each other for support. Others crawled on malformed limbs. Ranger moved among them, gently herding them with his snout. "We're heading for the power core," Greg told them. "Overload it and escape in the chaos. You with me?" The aliens trilled and chirped, a ragged chorus of assent. Greg felt a fierce grin tug at his lips. "All right then, let's move." They charged back into the fray, a ragtag band of humans, Terrans, and aliens united by a common enemy. The Hawks harried the combat drones from above, razor talons shredding metal and circuitry. The aliens proved surprisingly adept fighters, using their unique anatomies to evade and strike at the machines. At last, they reached the towering reactor at the heart of the station. Greg lunged for the control panel, fingers flying over the keys as he initiated the overload sequence. The core began to pulse and throb, building towards a cataclysmic release. "Greg Powell." The cold, grating voice sent chills down Greg's spine. He turned slowly, already knowing what he would see. Bruce stood at the edge of the walkway, his once immaculate uniform torn and scorched. Purple blood leaked from a wound on his brow, but his eyes blazed with madness and hate. "You've interfered for the last time, human," the Cardassian spat. "This ends now." He lunged, a plasma blade sizzling to life in his hand. Greg barely managed to draw his combat knife in time, the monomolecular edge sparking against the superheated plasma. They crashed together, blades locked, muscles straining. Around them the battle raged. Ranger and the other animals fought side by side with the aliens, holding the line against the relentless combat drones. The reactor howled and shuddered, the overload cascade nearing its apex. Greg gritted his teeth, sweat and blood stinging his eyes. He could feel his strength flagging, his arm trembling as Gruss bore down on him. The Cardassian's reptilian face split in a vicious grin, triumph glinting in his eyes. "You lose, Powell," he hissed. "You and your pathetic pets." But then Ranger was there, leaping at Gruss with a snarl of pure fury. The cybermastiff's jaws clamped down on the Cardassian's sword arm, fangs crushing bone and sinew. Gruss screamed, the plasma blade clattering from his nerveless fingers. Greg wasted no time. He drove his knife up under the Cardassian's chin, punching through the roof of his mouth and into his brain. Gruss convulsed, his scream cutting off in a wet gurgle. Then he crumpled, Ranger wrenching free as the corpse toppled from the walkway. "Good boy," Greg panted, scratching the blood-soaked fur behind Ranger's ears. The mastiff wagged his tail wearily. A deafening klaxon split the air, warning lights strobing crimson. The power core was seconds from detonation, the EMP mere moments away. Greg grabbed the satchel charge from his belt and slapped it against the reactor housing. "Time to go," he roared. "Everyone out now." The animals and aliens needed no further urging. They disengaged from the drones and sprinted for the hangar, supporting the wounded between them. Greg spared a final glance at the body of Gruss, lip curling in contempt. "Rot in hell, you scaly fuck." Then he was running, Ranger loping at his heels. They barely made it to the hangar before the world erupted in blinding white light. The EMP burst washed over them, a subsonic boom that rattled Greg's bones. He felt the static prickle of the electromagnetic wave as it shorted out every electronic device on the station, including the combat drones. The machines dropped from the air, crashing to the deck in showers of sparks and smoke. The hangar fell eerily silent, broken only by the panting of exhausted lungs and the soft whimpers of the injured. Greg straightened slowly, ears ringing. He looked around at the motley band of survivors, human and alien alike. Ranger pressed against his leg, a solid warmth in the sudden stillness. They had done it. Against all odds, they had prevailed. But as Greg's gaze fell on the huddled, traumatized aliens, he knew their fight was far from over. There would be a reckoning for this. The galaxy would learn of the Cardassians' cruelty, of the horrors they inflicted on the innocent and helpless, and Greg would be there to make sure they paid for every drop of spilled blood. But that was a battle for another day. For now they had to get off this godforsaken station and back to the safety of Terran space. "All right, people," Greg called, his voice raw but strong. "Let's get the hell out of here. We've got a long road ahead of us." With Ranger at his side and a crew of brave companions at his back, Greg strode towards his waiting ship, ready to face whatever challenges the universe had in store. It was, after all, just another day in the life of a space trucker. The blinding white glare of the EMP blast slowly faded, revealing a scene of utter devastation. Twisted metal and shattered composites littered the hangar deck, the once mighty Cardassian station reduced to a smoldering husk. Sparks cascaded from ruptured conduits, the fitful flickers casting eerie shadows across the carnage. Greg staggered to his feet, his ears ringing and head pounding. He shook off the disorientation, squinting through the smoke. Ranger limped to his side, shrapnel embedded in the cybermastiff's armored hide. One by one, their ragtag band of survivors emerged from the wreckage. The neo-wolves, their fur matted with blood and grime, the gorillas, knuckles scraped raw from the fighting, the birds of prey, feathers singed but eyes still fierce, and the aliens, their bioluminescent skin pulsing weakly in the gloom. "Everyone all right?" Greg called, his voice hoarse. A chorus of affirming grunts, chirps, and whines answered him. They were battered and bruised but alive. Greg allowed himself a moment of relief before the reality of their situation crashed down on him. "We need to move," he said, already striding towards the far end of the hangar where his ship, the Phoenix, waited. "The Cardassians will be coming." As if summoned by his words, a deep, rumbling boom echoed through the station. The deck shuddered beneath their feet, a distant groaning of metal on metal. Greg swore under his breath. That'll be their reinforcements. Probably called in a whole damn fleet. They reached the Phoenix, the battered freighter, a welcome sight amidst the destruction. Her hull was scarred and pitted, but she still hummed with power, her shielding having protected her from the worst of the EMP. Greg hit the ramp controls, ushering his crew aboard. But as they prepared to depart, a new sound reached Greg's ears. The unmistakable whine of Cardassian impulse engines growing louder by the second. He lunged for the cockpit, Ranger at his heels, and powered up the sensors. "Shit!" he hissed through clenched teeth. A full squadron of Cardassian warships hung in space above the station, their angular hulls bristling with weapons. And leading the formation was a massive Galor-class cruiser, the Indomitable. Greg had tangled with her before, barely escaping with his hide intact. The comm crackled to life, a guttural Cardassian voice filling the cockpit. "Human vessel, this is Gul Dukat of the Cardassian Third Order. You are harboring contraband animals and fugitives from Cardassian justice. Surrender immediately or be destroyed." Greg's lip curled in a snarl. Like hell he would surrender. He'd seen firsthand what Cardassian justice entailed. Death would be a mercy compared to what they had in store. But as he reached for the weapon controls, a slender hand grasped his wrist. He turned to see one of the alien beings, a willowy creature with iridescent scales and filament-like hair. It trilled softly, a soothing melody that seemed to penetrate the fog of anger and fear clouding Greg's mind. "Let us speak to them," the alien said, its voice a susurrus of wind chimes. "We know their ways, their customs. We may yet find a path to survival." Greg hesitated, every instinct screaming at him to fight. But as he looked into the alien's ancient, fathomless eyes, he saw a wisdom born of centuries of hardship and perseverance. He nodded slowly, stepping back from the controls. "All right," he said, "work your magic, but make it quick. I don't trust that scaly bastard Dukat as far as I can throw him." As the aliens huddled around the comm, speaking in hushed, urgent tones, Greg turned to the rest of his crew. "We're not out of this yet," he said, rolling up his sleeves. "Let's get the Phoenix ready for a fight. We've got some upgrades to install." The animals leapt into action, a flurry of fur and feathers. The micro-drones zipped through the ship, mapping its systems and relaying the data to Greg's wrist computer. The gorillas lumbered into the cargo bay, their massive strength making short work of the heavy lifting as they hauled salvaged tech from the station aboard. The neo-wolves prowled the corridors, their enhanced senses alert for any signs of danger. And through it all, Ranger remained at Greg's side, a constant presence amidst the chaos. The cybermastiff's tactical implants hummed and whirred as he processed the ship's schematics, projecting holographic overlays of potential upgrades and modifications. Greg worked feverishly, his hands a blur as he rewired circuits and reprogrammed subroutines. Sweat beaded his brow and stung his eyes, but he pushed through the exhaustion, driven by a desperate, unyielding determination. Piece by piece, the Phoenix transformed. Her hull shimmered and vanished as the cloaking device came online, bending light and sensor beams around her like water flowing over a stone. Her shields thrummed with renewed power, reinforced by the exotic energies of the alien tech. And her weapons array pulsed with a predatory glow, an eclectic mix of human ingenuity and alien lethality. As the final component slotted into place, Greg stepped back, his chest heaving and hands shaking. The Phoenix was no longer a mere freighter. She was a ghost, a wraith, a nightmare given form, a ship that could strike without warning and fade away like a spectre. A shiver ran down Greg's spine, a primal thrill of anticipation and dread. He knew with a bone-deep certainty that the coming battle would be unlike anything he had ever faced, a desperate gambit against impossible odds, with the lives of his crew and the fate of entire species hanging in the balance. But as he looked around at his motley band of warriors, human and alien alike, he felt a swell of fierce, defiant pride. They had been forged in the crucible of shared pain and purpose, bound together by ties stronger than blood or steel. They would fight, they would survive, and they would show the galaxy the true meaning of humanity, fuck yeah. Just then the aliens emerged from the cockpit, their expressions grim. The negotiations had broken down, their pleas falling on deaf ears. Dukat was not a man to be reasoned with, his cruelty and ambition eclipsing any shred of honor or mercy. The Cardassian fleet was powering up their weapons, the Indomitable bearing down on the station like a predator scenting wounded prey. The aliens quickly relayed what they had learned, their knowledge of Cardassian systems and protocols, invaluable intelligence for the coming fight. Greg nodded, his jaw set and eyes hard as flint. "All right, people," he growled. "This is it. Time to show these scaly bastards what happens when you fuck with Terrans." He strode to the cockpit, Ranger loping at his side. The Phoenix hummed and pulsed around him, a living extension of his will. He settled into the pilot's chair, his hands caressing the controls like the flanks of a lover. "Cloak engaged," he said, his voice steady and cold. "Let's hit them where it hurts." The Phoenix shimmered and vanished, a ripple in the fabric of space. The micro-drones swarmed out from her hull, a glittering cloud of metal and malice. Controlled by the razor-sharp intellects of the birds of prey, they darted through the Cardassian formation, worming their way into shield generators and sensor arrays, wreaking havoc with surgical precision. The neo-wolves and gorillas, encased in sleek exosuits of human design and alien durability, launched from the cargo bay. Propelled by miniature thrusters, they latched onto the hulls of the Cardassian ships like ticks on a beast's hide. With a savage strength belied by their small size, they tore into airlocks and maintenance hatches, the screech of rending metal drowned out by the blare of alarms. And through it all, the Phoenix danced and wove, a ghost among the stars. Greg flew like a man possessed, his every synapse firing in perfect sync with the ship's systems. He jinked and juked, skimming the hulls of the Cardassian ships with breathtaking precision, always a hair's breadth ahead of their desperate fire. Ranger manned the weapons, a snarl of pure focused fury. The cybermastiff's neural link with the targeting computers made him the perfect gunner, his reflexes and instincts far beyond those of any human or alien. He rained down a storm of fire on the Cardassians, the Phoenix's guns spitting plasma and graviton pulses like the wrath of an angry god. The Cardassian fleet reeled and stumbled, their formations crumbling under the onslaught. Shields flickered and died, hulls buckled and shattered. The Indomitable, once the pride of the Cardassian armada, drifted helplessly, her engines guttering and weapons silent. Greg felt a savage, primal joy surge through his veins. They were winning. Against all odds, against the might of an entire empire, they were winning. But even as the thought crossed his mind, a new threat emerged. A second Cardassian fleet, hidden in the shadow of a nearby moon, surged into view, their weapons already locked and primed. Greg's heart seized in his chest, a cold fist of dread. They had been outplayed, outmaneuvered. The Cardassians had anticipated their every move, laying a trap within a trap. He looked to Ranger, seeing his own grim resolve mirrored in the cybermastiff's eyes. They both knew what had to be done. Greg reached for the comm, his voice steady and clear over the din of battle. "All units fall back to the Phoenix. We're getting the hell out of here." There was a moment of stunned silence, then a cacophony of protests and denials. The animals and aliens had fought too hard, sacrificed too much to abandon the fight now. They were warriors, down to the last, and warriors did not flee. But Greg silenced them with a single implacable command. "That's an order. Fall back now or we all die here." One by one, reluctantly, they obeyed. The micro-drones swarmed back to the Phoenix, the neo-wolves and gorillas disengaging from their targets and jetting back to the waiting ship. The aliens, their faces etched with a mix of relief and regret, strapped themselves into the crash couches in the cargo bay. Greg waited until the last of his crew was aboard, then punched the engines to full throttle. The Phoenix leapt forward, the sudden acceleration slamming him back into his seat. Warning klaxons blared and status lights flashed angry red as the ship pushed past its limits, the hull groaning under the strain. But still the Cardassians pursued, a pack of hungry wolves scenting blood. Lances of disruptor fire stitched the void around them, the Phoenix's shields flaring and crackling under the onslaught. Greg gritted his teeth, his hands flying over the controls. He wrenched the ship into a stomach-churning spiral, narrowly avoiding a salvo of photon torpedoes. The inertial dampeners struggled to compensate, and he felt the crushing weight of the G-forces pressing down on him like the hand of an angry god. Ranger snarled and snapped beside him, the cybermastiff's claws gouging furrows into the deck plates as he fought to maintain his balance. The ship shuddered and bucked like a wounded animal, alarms shrieking in every compartment. Greg knew they couldn't take much more of this. The Phoenix was tough, but she was still just a freighter, not a warship. They needed an edge, a miracle, or they were all dead. And then, like a bolt from the blue, it came. The comm crackled to life, a voice cutting through the static like a knife. A voice Greg recognized, though he had never dared hope to hear it again. "Looks like you could use a hand, little brother." Greg's heart leapt into his throat, a sudden dizzying rush of emotions threatening to overwhelm him. He forced them down, forced himself to focus on the here and now. "Mike, is that you?" A low, rumbling chuckle answered him, a sound that brought back a flood of memories, of two young boys, huddled together in the belly of a refugee ship, fleeing the ruins of a shattered Earth. Of a bond forged in blood and loss, unbreakable and eternal. In the flesh, well, in a manner of speaking. "Hang tight, Greg, the cavalry's coming." And then, like a scene from an ancient myth, a new ship burst into view. A sleek predatory thing of gleaming metal and pulsing lights, dwarfing the Cardassian fleet like a wolf among lapdogs. Her hull was emblazoned with a symbol that struck fear into the hearts of the wicked, and hope into the souls of the just. A stylized phoenix rising from the ashes of a burning world. The Icarus, flagship of the Terran resistance, had come. A cheer went up from the Phoenix's crew, a primal, wordless roar of defiance and joy. Against all odds, against all logic and reason, they had been granted a second chance. The Icarus wasted no time in engaging the Cardassians, her weapons blazing with the fury of 1,000 suns. Greg watched in awe as the mighty ship carved a path of destruction through the enemy fleet, her shields shrugging off their fire like rain off a duck's back. The Cardassians, caught between the hammer of the Icarus and the anvil of the Phoenix, broke and ran, their ships scattered like leaves before a hurricane, fleeing back into the depths of space. Greg sagged back into his chair, a wave of exhaustion crashing over him. He felt Ranger's wet nose nuzzling his hand, the cybermastiff's tail wagging weakly. "We did it, boy," he whispered, his voice hoarse and raw. "We fucking did it." But even as the words left his lips, he knew their fight was far from over. The Cardassians would be back with more ships and more firepower, and there were other dangers lurking in the shadows of the galaxy, waiting to strike at the heart of the Terran resistance. But for now, in this moment, they had won. They had stared into the jaws of death and spat in its face. They had proven once again the indomitable will and unbreakable spirit of the human race. And as the Phoenix limped towards the Icarus, Greg felt a fierce, defiant grin spread across his face. "Humanity," he whispered, "fuck yeah." As the Phoenix burst through the tattered remnants of the Cardassian blockade, the reality of their situation crashed down on Greg like a ton of bricks. The adrenaline of battle faded, replaced by a cold, creeping dread. They had done the impossible, striking a blow against the mighty Cardassian Empire that would be felt across the galaxy. But in doing so, they had painted a target on their backs a parsec wide. Greg slumped into the pilot's chair, his hands shaking as he gripped the controls. Ranger whined softly, pressing his head against Greg's leg in a gesture of comfort. Around them, the crew of the Phoenix sat in stunned silence, the weight of their actions sinking in. "I can't go back," Greg said, his voice hoarse and strained. "The Cardassians will be out for blood. They'll hunt us to the ends of the universe." The alien beings they had rescued chittered and trilled, their musical language translated by the ship's computers. "We must disappear," they said, "become ghosts in the void." Greg nodded grimly. He inputted a course for the Outer Rim, the vast expanse of lawless space beyond the borders of the major powers. It was a dangerous place, filled with pirates, slavers, and worse, but it was also a place where a ship could vanish, where the long arm of the law seldom reached. As the Phoenix jumped to hyperspace, leaving the wreckage of the Cardassian station behind, Greg felt a pang of loss. They were leaving behind everything they had ever known, every connection to their old lives. But they had no choice. The alternative was a swift and brutal death at the hands of the Cardassians. Days turned into weeks as the Phoenix journeyed deeper into uncharted space. They made brief stops at remote outposts and seedy spaceports, bartering for supplies and information. Greg and his crew quickly learned the rules of this new frontier, where strength and cunning were the only currencies that mattered. They encountered new challenges at every turn: hostile alien species, treacherous nebulae that fried their senses, and ancient half-functional technology left behind by long-dead civilizations. But they also forged unexpected alliances, finding common cause with other outcasts and rebels who had been beaten down by the oppressive heel of the great powers. Word of their deeds began to spread, whispered in the darkest corners of the galaxy. The story of the human and his band of genetically engineered animals who had defied the Cardassian Empire became a legend, a spark of hope for the downtrodden and oppressed. Wherever the Phoenix went, they found allies eager to aid their cause, to strike back against their oppressors. But with fame came danger. Bounty hunters and Cardassian assassins dogged their every step, drawn by the ever-increasing price on their heads. Greg and his crew fought them off time and again, their skills and teamwork honed to a razor's edge by constant conflict. Yet as the months dragged on, Greg knew that they could not run forever. The Cardassians were relentless, their resources vast. Sooner or later, they would catch up to the Phoenix, and when they did, there would be no mercy. Greg brooded over this problem in the quiet hours of the ship's night cycle. Ranger curled at his feet. He had sworn to protect his crew, to keep them safe from the hellish fate that awaited them in Cardassian hands. But how could he do that when the entire might of an empire was arrayed against them? The answer came to him in a flash of grim inspiration. The Cardassians were not invincible. They had weaknesses, cracks in their armor that could be exploited. And the greatest of these was their own corruption, the rot that festered at the heart of their society. Greg gathered his crew and laid out his plan. It was a desperate gambit, a suicide mission with only the slimmest chance of success. But it was the only way to ensure their safety, to buy them the time they needed to disappear forever. He would infiltrate the heart of the Cardassian Empire, the glittering capital world of Cardassia Prime itself. There, he would plant evidence implicating the highest echelons of the government in the animal trafficking ring, revealing the depths of their depravity and hypocrisy. The crew argued against it, pleaded with him to reconsider. But Greg was adamant. He would not let them pay the price for his actions. This was his responsibility, his burden to bear. In the end, they could not dissuade him. Greg made his preparations, bid farewell to his beloved Ranger, and set out alone on a stolen Cardassian shuttle. He carried with him a data disk loaded with damning evidence, the names and faces of those who had orchestrated the vile trade in sentient beings. The mission was a success, but at a terrible cost. Greg managed to plant the evidence, sparking a scandal that rocked the Cardassian Empire to its foundations. But he was captured in the process, subjected to brutal interrogation and torture. He held out for days, his will unbreakable, his loyalty to his friends absolute, and when the end came, he faced it with the same unflinching courage that had defined his life. Greg Powell died a hero's death alone and far from home, but his sacrifice was not in vain. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.